Welcome to Unfiltered Reflections. I'm your host, Passion. We build our lives within frames: the frame of a day, from sunrise to sunset, the frame of a relationship, from first hello to last goodbye, and the most literal of frames, the walls of our homes. They are the silent witnesses to our lives, the containers of our joys and our sorrows. They hold the smell of burnt toast and the echo of laughter. They offer us a place to retreat, to be messy, to be vulnerable, to be unapologetically ourselves. But what happens when those frames begin to disappear? What if the very idea of a private space, a room of one's own, becomes an outdated, even suspicious concept? Today, we have a story about a woman named Alara, living in a world that has fallen in love with the idea of being open, a world where the walls are, quite literally, coming down. Alara first noticed it not as a loss, but as an addition, a light. It was a sliver of pale, buttery morning light that had no business being in her hallway. The hallway was the central artery of her small apartment, a dim corridor that connected her bedroom, her study, and the living area. It was her place of transition, windowless by design, a pause between the different rooms of her life. But on this Tuesday, the light was there, slicing across the floorboards from the direction of the kitchen. She followed it, her bare feet silent on the cool wood, and she saw it. The wall between the kitchen and the hallway wasn't gone. Not entirely. It was thinner, translucent. She could see the faint, ghostly outline of her refrigerator, the soft curve of the kettle on the counter. It was like looking through frosted glass that had been left out in the rain, its opacity compromised. She ran a hand over the surface. It was still solid, still plaster and paint, but it felt porous, as if the very molecules had been convinced to stand a little farther apart. On the local news that evening, they called it the Cohesion Initiative. A smiling, immaculately dressed spokesperson stood in front of a shimmering, boundary-less home. News anchor, a revolutionary step towards a more integrated and harmonious society. The Cohesion Initiative, sponsored by Omni Living Designs, is phasing out the archaic divisions that have kept us apart for so long. Why should the heart of the home be hidden? Why should our lives be compartmentalized? True community begins at home, with the free flow of light, conversation, and connection. The spokesperson explained the science using words like molecular resonance and structural permeability. It was a gradual, voluntary process, they assured. Homeowners could sign up to have their homes unified. It was pitched as progress, a beautiful, inevitable evolution. Alara had never signed up, but the humming had started a week ago. A low, city-wide thrum that vibrated deep in her teeth, and now this. Her wall was becoming a ghost. Alara was a mender of antique books. Her study was her sanctuary. It was a small, cramped room filled with the sweet, dusty scent of aging paper and leather. It was the one place that was truly hers, a fortress of quiet concentration. Her work required stillness, a deep and abiding silence, where she could listen to the stories the broken spines and torn pages had to tell. A few days later, the light in the hallway was brighter. The kitchen wall was now as clear as a pane of glass. She found herself watching the hypnotic swirl of steam from her tea kettle while standing in the hallway, feeling strangely exposed, as if she were in two rooms at once. The smells began to bleed through. The sharp, happy scent of lemon she used for cleaning now met her the moment she stepped out of her bedroom. The savory aroma of garlic and onions sizzling in a pan would snake its way into her study, clinging to the ancient pages of a 19th century novel. It was disorienting. The distinct character of each room, the unique atmosphere she had so carefully cultivated, was dissolving into a single homogeneous soup of sensory information. Her neighbor, a young man named Ben, was an enthusiast. "Ben, isn't it incredible, Alara? I had my living room and kitchen wall done last month. The sense of space is just wow. My apartment feels twice as big. We had a party last weekend and it was perfect. I could chop vegetables and still be part of the conversation. No more being exiled, you know?" Alara nodded, forcing a smile. She didn't say that she sometimes enjoyed the exile. She liked the quiet solitude of chopping vegetables, the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the knife on the board as a form of meditation. For her, cooking was a private dialogue between her and the ingredients. Now, the idea of it becoming a performance, a spectacle for guests to watch, felt like an intrusion. The pressure to be on was constant. With her kitchen visible from the hallway, A dirty dish left in the sink felt like a public failing. A pile of mail on the counter seemed like an indictment of her organizational skills. The kitchen, once a functional workspace, had become a stage, and it had to be kept perpetually ready for an audience, even if the audience was just herself, catching a glimpse of it as she walked by. It was exhausting. The magical realism of her world began to deepen. It wasn't just light and smell that passed through the permeable walls. It was sound, too, but in a strange, distorted way. The crisp clink of a spoon against a ceramic mug in the kitchen would arrive in her study as a long, mournful chime. The frantic bubbling of boiling pasta would sound like a worried whisper in her bedroom at night. And then came the colors. One evening, while simmering a rich crimson tomato sauce, she noticed a faint pink haze seeping through the translucent wall into the hallway. It was the color of the sauce's aroma, a visual representation of its scent. The next morning, the zesty yellow smell of a freshly cut grapefruit manifested as a pale, shimmering gold mist that drifted towards her study. Her apartment, once a collection of distinct spaces, was becoming a canvas for an abstract, ever-changing painting of sensory bleed. A beautiful chaos. But it wasn't her chaos. It was an imposed chaos, a forced intimacy with her own home. The Cohesion Initiative grew bolder. City blocks were designated for full unification. From the street, you could look straight through the front of a brownstone, past the living area, through the dining space, and see the flickering blue flame of the gas stove in the kitchen at the very back. Families lived their lives in these human aquariums, their every domestic act on display. Proponents called it radical transparency. They said it fostered a new kind of neighborhood watch, a collective responsibility. Alara watched them from her window, the people living in the glass houses. She saw a woman stirring a pot, her shoulders slumped. She saw a man scrubbing a pan with furious energy, his back to the street but his frustration visible in the rigid set of his spine. She saw children whose games of hide and seek were confined to crouching behind a sofa, their options for invisibility shrinking by the day. They smiled and waved at passersby, but their eyes held a strained, tired quality. The performance was taking its toll. Then, the wall between her study and the living room began to thin. This was a different kind of violation. The kitchen was one thing, but her study, that was her soul. The first sign was the sound. The low murmur of the television in the living room began to leak into her silent workspace, not as words, but as a low, anxious hum. Then came the light. The cool, blue-white glow of the screen pulsed against the edge of her vision, a persistent distraction. One afternoon, she was painstakingly reattaching the frayed cover of a book of poetry. It was delicate work, requiring absolute focus. She held her breath, applying a microdot of adhesive with the tip of a fine needle. At that exact moment, her living room wall shimmered, and a wave of color washed into her study. It was a chaotic, strobing mess of bright blues and explosive oranges from the action movie her landlord was watching in the apartment next door, his own home now fully cohered and bleeding into the building's shared spaces. The colors were accompanied by a cacophony of sound, not just the movie's explosions, but the emotional residue of it. A jolt of manufactured adrenaline, a wave of synthetic panic washed over her. Her hand jerked. A black smear of adhesive marred the book's antique, cream-colored page. She stared at the black mark. A permanent stain. An invasion. The quiet, contained world of the past, held within the pages of the book, had been violated by the loud, intrusive, boundary-less present. Tears welled in her eyes. It wasn't just about the book. It was about the relentless erosion of her selfhood. Where did she end and the rest of the world begin? If she had no room to retreat to, no wall to put between her and the endless stream of noise, light, and emotion, how could she ever hear her own thoughts? How could she mend what was broken if she herself was constantly being broken into? That night, she had a dream. She was in a vast, open plain under a white sky. There were no horizons, no landmarks. Thousands of people milled about, but no one spoke. They just cooked, on gleaming, identical stoves that stretched in every direction. The air was thick with a billion competing smells: curry and pot roast, burnt sugar and frying fish, a nauseating perfume. The sounds of a million pots and pans clattering created a deafening metallic roar. Everyone was watching everyone else. A woman to her left was flawlessly julienning carrots, her movements crisp and perfect. A man to her right plated a steak with the precision of a surgeon. It was a global kitchen, an endless performance of domestic perfection. And Alara stood there clutching a single cold egg, terrified to crack it open, knowing that the moment she did, 1,000 eyes would turn to judge the sound it made, the way it fell into the pan, the final color of its yolk. She woke up with a gasp, her heart pounding. The humming of the city was louder than ever. Enough. She got out of bed, a new resolve hardening in her chest. She went not to her study, but to the building's basement. It was a damp, forgotten space, filled with the ghosts of discarded things. In a far corner, behind a rusted boiler, she found them. A stack of old, solid wood doors, salvaged from a renovation years ago. They were heavy, dense, and beautifully opaque. She dragged one up the 3 flights of stairs, the wood groaning and scraping against the concrete steps. It was a Herculean effort. Sweat stung her eyes, her muscles screamed. But with every step, she felt a sliver of her own space being reclaimed. She leaned the door against the opening to her study. It didn't fit perfectly, but it was a barrier, a statement. She then dragged another, leaning it against the translucent kitchen wall. It was a clumsy, ugly solution. The beautiful, flowing light was blocked, replaced by the dark, imposing grain of the old wood. But behind it, there was silence. Blessed, profound silence. In her kitchen, now a dim, enclosed cavern, she took out a pan. She cracked an egg. The sound was small, private, and entirely her own. As it sizzled, the smell of it, a simple, comforting, buttery smell, filled the small space. But it went no further. It was contained. It was hers. The next day, there was a knock. It was a woman in a crisp, gray jumpsuit with an Omni Living Designs logo on her breast. "Ma'am, we've detected an anomaly in your unit's cohesion profile, an unauthorized erection of opaque barriers." Alara looked at the solid wood door she'd propped in her main doorway. She didn't open it. "Alara, I'm mending things. It requires privacy." "Ma'am, privacy is an outdated concept. It breeds division. Openness is connection. Openness is community. Openness is performance. It's pressure. It's the loss of the right to be messy, to be sad, to be quiet, to be anything less than perfectly curated for public consumption. This is a violation of your residency agreement, ma'am. These structures must come down. The goal is a seamless living experience." A seamless living experience. The phrase echoed in Alara's mind. A life with no seams, no edges, no private corners. A life where the functional, messy, beautiful, and sometimes frustrating act of sustaining oneself, of cooking a meal, was no longer a personal ritual, but a public broadcast. Where the kitchen wasn't a workshop for nourishment, but a showroom for high-end appliances and performative hospitality. Where the person stirring the pot was no longer just a person, but a host, a chef, a spectacle, all at once. She looked from her reclaimed kitchen, now a space of comfortable shadows and contained aromas, to her reclaimed study, a sanctuary of silence. She had built her own walls against a world that insisted she have none. It was an act of rebellion, a quiet, desperate, and necessary revolution. She placed her hand on the solid wood of the door, feeling its unyielding strength. The humming from the city seemed to fade, replaced by the steady, even rhythm of her own breathing. She was framed, once again, within a space that was hers and hers alone. She was finally separate and finally whole. Alara's story is a fiction, a magical realist imagining of a world obsessed with transparency. But the tension she feels is real. We live in an age that champions openness. We share our lives, our meals, our homes online. We are encouraged to break down walls, both literal and metaphorical. We crave connection, community, and a sense of togetherness. We redesign our homes to reflect this, creating great rooms where life can happen all at once, in one shared space. But in our quest for seamless living, what do we lose? What is the cost of eliminating the quiet corners, the private rooms where we can be unobserved, unjudged, and simply be? Alara's rebellion wasn't against community. It was a fight for the personal sanctuary required to truly know oneself, so that what you bring to the community is authentic, not a performance. It's the radical idea that to be a whole person, you sometimes need a door to close, a wall to lean on, and a space where your messes, your smells, and your quietest thoughts belong only to you. Her story is a defense of the profound and perhaps endangered beauty of the closed door. a reminder that the heart of the home is not always found in the space that is most visible, but in the feeling of safety it provides. It's a conflict many of us now navigate in our own homes, a debate between connection and containment, between community and privacy, all embodied in the design of a single room. The architectural trend that inspired this story is called the open concept kitchen. If you've enjoyed this episode, please visit our website at deszicakes.com. Thanks for joining me on Unfiltered Reflections. Until next time, be kind to yourself, keep exploring, and remember, you are worthy, you are seen, and you are loved.